Hey guys, another day and another brand new 5 polls to take a look at. 4 of them are the national picture of this 2020 Democratic primary, and then we'll wrap things up looking at a state-specific result out of South Carolina that has some really interesting details in those numbers. But we're going to start here with the national polls, and if you'd like to take a look at any of these resources for yourself, of course, I will have links posted down in the video description. Starting out with this national Emerson poll, and what I'm going to do here is compare these current results to the prior polls that came out from these resources to see what kind of shifting around we've seen. And it continues to be a very positive sign for the Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders, whereas the former Vice President Joe Biden continues to take these steps back, and it's looking like a troubling situation for his campaign as we move our way forward. So starting off here, we have Bernie Sanders at 29% in first place. He's up 2 points from the prior national Emerson poll, which came out about 4 weeks ago towards the end of January. Now, Biden actually in that last national Emerson poll was in first place at 30%, but he recedes back 8 points. He's in second place at 22%. Bloomberg jumps up 7 points, so he doubles his support from 7 up to 14. Elizabeth Warren loses a point. She's in fourth place at 12. And then we have Buttigieg, Klobuchar, and Tom Steyer. All of them each gained 2 points, and then Gabbard gained 3 points, and they're at 8, 6, 4, and 3 percentage points, respectively. And I wanted to touch on a couple of other graphs that are in this national Emerson poll. So taking a look here at the commitment of these voters to supporting the candidate that's currently their top choice, and this is something that we've consistently seen throughout this process, where Sanders has the most committed supporters, and then Buttigieg has some of the least committed supporters behind him. So the darker part of the graph is I will definitely vote for this candidate, and then the lighter portion is there's a chance I could change my mind. Sanders has the most commitment at 67, and then Biden also relatively competitive there, up at 60%. Now, Tom Steyer's 56% doesn't really mean all that much because he's sitting down there at just 3% of support, so 56% of 3% isn't nearly as big of a block of voters, obviously, as what 67% of 29% would end up being. And then we can see Warren and Bloomberg are each at about a 50-50 split. Klobuchar at 44, and then Gabbard at 27, and Buttigieg just there at 26%. And then I also wanted to take a look at the head-to-head matchups, and we can see that in this instance, Sanders is actually the only candidate defeating Trump in that national head-to-head, where he's at 51 to Trump, who's at 49. And then we can see Buttigieg, Klobuchar, and Bloomberg are each losing to Trump by 2 percentage points. And then actually Biden does the worst in this instance, where he's down to Trump by 4 points. And that electability argument is taking a bit of a beating for Biden, working our way through these early caucus and primary states, and now we're starting to see that translate over into some of these national polls where he isn't doing as well against Trump as some of these other upper-tier Democratic hopefuls. Now I want to move over and take a look at the updated numbers from the morning consult, and this is going to be in contrast to the numbers that came out about a week ago, right before heading into the New Hampshire primary. So that contrast here, Sanders was at 25, and in second place, relatively competitive, was Biden at 22. We can see a bit of a difference here where Sanders picks up 3 points in first place at 28%. Bloomberg picks up 3 points. He's at a close second, third place range there along with Biden. Bloomberg is bringing in 20%, and then Biden loses 3 points down to 19. And throughout this entire past year, the Morning Consult has been a relatively strong polling resource for Joe Biden, but now that we've actually headed in to primary season, and we've seen that Biden has struggled out of the gate in Iowa as well as New Hampshire, we'll see how he does in these upcoming states of Nevada and South Carolina. But having that electability argument take a bit of a beating in those first 2 cases, I think that that's probably why some of his voters have transitioned over into supporting some of these other candidates. But Biden takes another step back in this instance, down to 19. And then we see Buttigieg, he picks up a point to 12%. Elizabeth Warren loses a point down to 10%. Amy Klobuchar, she doubles her support from 3 points to 6 points, so getting a little bit of a boost there after that surprisingly strong result in New Hampshire, but still just hovering in the mid-single digits. And then we have Steyer at 3% and Tulsi Gabbard at 2. Steyer staying even and Gabbard picking up 1 point. And we can see these trend lines over time. The green line is Joe Biden. Like I said, throughout pretty much this entire past year, he's been relatively strong in these morning consult numbers, but then right as we headed in to Iowa and New Hampshire, now we can see a big drop-off where towards the end of January, he was in the upper 20 percentage point range, and he's lost about 10 points since then, where he's now down to 19. We can see this steady improvement from Sanders over the past handful of months, where he's now up to 28. And then the orange line is Bloomberg. He has had some big steps forward here over the past couple months, where he's now up to 20 points. The purple line is Warren. She's dipped since those first two contests, now down to 10, whereas Pete Buttigieg has able to double his numbers over the past couple of weeks. He was at 6 points, now he's up to 12, and then also Klobuchar taking a little bit of a step up there to 6 points. And now I want to take a look at the second choice among these upper tier Democratic supporters, and it actually paints a pretty interesting picture. Now, Sanders and Bloomberg very likely to be in this contest all the way to the convention, so the second choice among their voters probably doesn't mean as much as the second choice among the other candidates who could bow out at some point throughout this process. But the second choice among Sanders supporters is Warren at 29, Joe Biden at 24. The second choice among Bloomberg supporters is Biden at 28, and then Buttigieg and Sanders each at 20%. And now getting into the candidates who actually could end up bowing out at some point throughout this process. So Biden, it kind of goes against conventional wisdom, but if he were to step out of the race, it would appear that his voters would more likely go to Sanders than they would Bloomberg, and that might not make sense to a lot of you guys out there who are more into the policies of these particular candidates, but that's not how things necessarily translate in the real world. So you have Sanders doing really well here at 33%, being the second choice, followed by Bloomberg at 24%. And then the other progressive here, Elizabeth Warren, is also in there at 14 percentage points. And then Buttigieg supporters, it's relatively competitive here at the top between Bloomberg, Klobuchar, and Sanders at 22, 22, and 20 percentage points, respectively. So if he dropped out of the race, it would likely be a pretty fairly even split there, again, among Bloomberg and Sanders. And then if Warren were to step out, it would be a big boost to Bernie Sanders because her second choice, her supporters are at 38% for Sanders, followed by Klobuchar at 16%, and then Biden and Mayor Pete at just 14%, and Bloomberg nowhere in this top option here of second choice among Warren supporters. So again, if we get a situation where Biden, Buttigieg, and Warren were to step out at some point over the next month or so, it would likely be more of a boost to Sanders' chances at winning than it would be for Bloomberg, or at least that's what the numbers would indicate from this poll. And then going down and taking a look at the favorable, unfavorable among these Democratic primary voters, and Sanders has claimed his position in a commanding spot as the most favorable and most net favorable. He's at 74% favorable compared to 21% unfavorable. It had gotten a little bit more competitive there at least in recent weeks from these morning consult numbers with Joe Biden, but he has separated a little bit more so from Biden in this particular result, where Biden's there at 66 and then 27% unfavorable. Bloomberg at 61% favorable, 25 unfavorable, mirroring essentially the numbers that we're getting from Warren. Buttigieg is at 60% favorable, 19 unfavorable. Klobuchar 49 to 17, and then you can see how the rest of the field plays out beyond that. So the first two polls, a little bit more in-depth and more numbers to go through than the following three polls that I'm going to run through next. So we have The Economist and YouGov. Hasn't necessarily been a great polling resource for Bernie Sanders. It has been a bit more bullish on Warren throughout this process. And looking at these numbers, candidates considered, actually, Sanders has the highest percentage of voters considering him at 44%, followed by Warren at 42%. And then Biden there at 38%, Buttigieg and Bloomberg at 27%, Klobuchar at 25%. And I've heard this a lot in the mainstream media that they're saying that Bernie Sanders, he has a ceiling, and will he be able to get through that ceiling to go on and capture the nomination? But based on the polling that we've seen, especially in head-to-head matchups, Sanders does very well in a one-on-one situation among all these upper-tier Democratic hopefuls. But also, if you have the most individuals saying that they're considering voting for you, that would indicate that you likely have a higher ceiling than those who are lower in that particular percentage for that category. So just something to keep in mind in that instance. And then going down and taking a look at the first choice from this Economist poll, and we can see that Bernie Sanders leads the way at 24%. And in comparison to the prior poll that came out from The Economist and YouGov, which was released a week ago, Bernie gains 2 points, so he's at 22, now he's up to 24. Biden stays flat at 18%. Warren picks up a point, she was at 15, now she's at 16. Bloomberg stays even at 12. Buttigieg picks up a point to 11%. Klobuchar stays flat at 7%. And then Steyer picks up a point to 2%, and Gabbard loses a point down to 2 percentage points as well. Now moving over to ABC and the Washington Post, and in comparison to the prior poll that came out from this resource, which was towards the end of January, specifically on January 23rd, in Sanders taking a big step forward in this instance, where he was at 23, now he is up to 32, nearly a 10 percentage point increase, and he's now doubling up the second place option here, Joe Biden, who recedes himself from 32% all the way down to 16. So Biden loses 16 percentage points. Bloomberg picks up 6 points. He was at 8. Now he's up to 14. Warren staying flat at 12%. Buttigieg picks up 3 points. He's now up to 8. Klobuchar picks up 4 points, now at 7. You can see how the rest of the field plays behind them. But a very credible polling resource, the Washington Post and ABC, and a very positive sign again for Bernie Sanders, where he's out into a significant lead over Biden, Bloomberg, and Warren, who are the only other candidates that were able to eclipse double digits of support. And now to wrap things up, we have a South Carolina poll, this one coming from Change Polls, and we can see in contrast to the prior result that came out from this particular resource from the state that things have changed quite a bit over the past couple of weeks. So that prior result came out January 29, and in this one, Biden, he loses a couple of points. He's in a tie for first place now with Sanders, who is also at 23%. So the prior poll, it was Biden at 25, Sanders at 20. In this instance, in South Carolina, they're both at 23 percentage points respectively. And coming into primary season, these first 4 states, the things that I felt most confident about was the fact that Joe Biden was going to win South Carolina and Bernie was going to win New Hampshire. New Hampshire ended up being a bit more competitive than I was expecting, but Bernie was still able to claim the popular vote win in that instance. Whereas Joe Biden, we'll see what ends up happening for him in South Carolina, but that's also starting to look like a bit more of a competitive race there at the top between Biden and some of these other options. So Steyer, he's put a ton of commitment into the state of South Carolina, a bunch of ad spends, and it looks like it's boosting him up in the polls here, where he's at 20%, gaining 2 points. Buttigieg, also a nice number here for him, where he picks up 8 points at 15% of support. Warren loses 2 points down to 9. Klobuchar picks up 6 points up to 8, and then Gabbard loses 2 points down there at just 1 percentage point. And one has to wonder how long Tulsi Gabbard is going to stay in this race. She obviously has no path to the nomination. We'll see if she continues to stick it out or if she ends her campaign at some point after these early states. So I appreciate you guys stopping by. Those were the 5 polls I wanted to touch on. And again, if you'd like to take a look at them for yourself, I'll have links posted down in the video description.